What up? It's your boy T-Bird Reactions. Days Wrestling Wednesday. I'm still going through this. I'm hopefully this is over by tomorrow. This little cold I've been going for a couple weeks. Yeah, I know. This long as I've been on off with this cold. Anyway. So this week I decided to put a poll on some reveals from Wrestling Andy that I should do today as well too. As you know, I've been doing it as a while as well too. As of lately as well too. So it was some ones I was wanting to do. I was interested in some of the newer ones, the one I had held in as well too. So it was choices for the Wrestling Andy videos was either defunct shows, the newest one, Brand Split, Architects of Wrestling, Architects Characters of Wrestling, and Best of NXT, which I ain't gonna help for a while. With a large majority vote, y'all want me to check out the newest one, the Brand Split, though. So that we were going to check out as well too. Brand Split was definitely like one of the best things that WWE could do, because at the time this is similar right not too long after I said WWE, yeah, WWE did this long after WCW got bought out by WWE as well too, which in terms it had a blown out roster as well too. And then around the time, I think this is no, Austin was still part of it. Yeah, well, he stopped wrestling, but he's around as well too though. And around the time, you know, some of your favorite legends like The Rock was on his way to Hollywood. Austin was down to the last run and everything, and we needed to expand into. And we need to get more wrestlers, more time as with this blow roster, including guys from WCW and ECW as well too. So the Brand Split was the best thing they did as well too. Was not only split the two shows of Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, as well as the BC show and BNC shows such as Sunday Night Heat and their newest show Velocity, showcasing some of the other times as well too though. And the thing about it even separates the style of wrestling, you know, where Raw was more so the sports entertainment with the dramatics and all that, while SmackDown was showcase of wrestling as well too, and which included the SmackDown, I think it was SmackDown 6 and everything. That included some of your favorite. I think part of it was like Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle. I think I could be wrong, but anyway, and you know, and not to mention the different GMs we have for both brands as well too was awesome, you know. And then it definitely my was crazy in part earlier the PG era. Then down the line they kept combining it, separating, started getting a little crazy, and so now the Brand Split is like depends. The Brand Split could be done better now, but for where it was and how it got started, it was definitely a good little idea as well too. So that being said, we're gonna check out the history behind the Brand Splits of WWE. Let's get it.
For most of WWE's history, there was just one roster. And so because of this, everyone was able to intermingle with one another as they fought over one set of belts and one set of spots in the pecking order. But on two separate occasions now, first starting in 2002 and then again starting in 2016, there has been a split in the locker room, with half of the people becoming Raw exclusives and the other half SmackDown exclusives. Why did this happen? How did it play out? And why did it get a second wind after it ended the first time? Well, that's exactly what we are going to be looking at right now in the entire history of WWE's Brand Split. Really, it all goes back to the Monday Night Wars of the mid to late 90s. That was the period when wrestling was at the hottest it had ever been in a mainstream sense. And a large part of the reason for this was because you had two powerhouses in both WWF and WCW competing with one another, with each having their own separate roster of stars.
Right.
Hell, it was the intense competition that this situation created which motivated each side to put out some of their best television ever, as they knew if they didn't, the other league was going to leave them in the dust. So once the Monday Night Wars came to an end in early 2001 then, after World Championship Wrestling went out of business, it caused things to get less exciting pretty quickly, as now, without a competitor breathing down their neck, WWF started to take their foot off the gas. And this led to TV getting altogether less vital to watch as the months progressed. How would Vince McMahon deal with the reduced fan interest which happened as a result of such a thing? Well, initially, he tried to restart the war when he bought WCW outright and attempted to get them a new TV deal. Sadly, though, by then, that company was such damaged goods, no network would take it on. And even if they had, it was never going to be real competition, as now both promotions were owned by the same person. Come on now, the fact that a WWF versus WCW battle could never live up to expectations when one person ruled over everything was made clear to see when the infamous Invasion angle, which took place across much of 2001, flopped spectacularly.
And the other half is because of damn Time Warner.
So, once that whole storyline was mercifully put out to pasture at that year's Survivor Series pay-per-view, it left fans with the sense that things were never going to be quite as good again, as true competition was now a thing of the past. But this wasn't the way Vince McMahon saw things. No, he still felt he could create an internal sense of competition within his own promotion, which would get things back to the way they'd been during the late 90s once more. How would he do this? Well, in early 2002, the boss would start making plans for a brand split, a move which would divide his roster into two separate, smaller ones, with half being exclusive to Raw and the other half being exclusive to SmackDown. Yes, the idea here, at least initially, was that each side would be truly autonomous, with them having completely different creative teams and no crossover with one another, something which would motivate them to try and score higher ratings than their competitor.
Right.
Of course, it wasn't just an attempt to recreate the Monday Night Wars which led to Vince doing this, though. No, after much of the WCW and ECW rosters had signed with WWE following the fall of those promotions, there was also now a sense that there were too many people there overall.
Yep,
Seriously,
exactly.
Given the size of the locker room in 2002, it would have been impossible for many up-and-comers to break into the main event scene if everything was,
as well as new faces coming into the WWE as well,
limited to just one collective group. No, that just wasn't realistic. But if things were split in two, with half the big stars being on one show and half being on the other, it would open up more space for people to break through that glass ceiling. Hell, if nothing else, it would allow them more TV time to develop, as now, rather than having to find space for someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock on both Mondays and Thursdays, you only had to find space for them on one of these days. Obviously then, given how much it seemed like it was going to be a clear benefit to the promotion overall, almost everyone who worked there was happy with the prospect of the brand split. And that meant when it officially started on the March 25th, 2002 episode of Raw, excitement was high. How did things get kicked off here? Well, with a draft, of course. That's right. As part of the ongoing storyline of the time, co-owners of WWE, Vince McMahon and Ric Flair, would take control of the blue and red brands respectively, and would, over the course of the 2 hours which followed, take turns drafting performers until each side had a starting roster of 10, which would then be added to and rounded out later via a random lottery. So it was then that once things were over, SmackDown would be the exclusive home of names like The Rock, Hulk Hogan, Kurt Angle, and Edge, all while Raw was the only place you'd be able to see performers such as The Undertaker, Kane, the NWO, and Lita going forward. What about others such as Steve Austin and Triple H? Well, for the Rattlesnakes part, he'd initially be a free agent, though he would eventually sign with Ric Flair's show. And as for Triple H, well, as he was the undisputed champion at the time, it meant he'd be able to travel between shows as and when he chose, defending the top.
Oh, this is before it. Oh yeah, this is was this before the this before they made the both had the big goal and then, you know. Oh yeah, because Eric Bishop wasn't GM yet.
Prize on each one, much in the same way the NWA World's Champion had traveled all around the territory circuit defending their gold back in the day.
This is when he split the title.
Yes, at least at first, there was still an attempt to keep the importance of the world title by having there be only one belt. But as those early months went on, it became clear this was a hindrance to the company, as whenever the champion was involved in a program on one brand for a month or two, it hurt the drawing power of the other. So it was then that after Brock Lesnar won the undisputed title from The Rock at SummerSlam in August of 2002, he'd be signed to SmackDown exclusively and would there see his gold be renamed the WWE title. Why was it no longer being called the undisputed title? Well, because now the question of who the real champion was in dispute again, as on the September 2nd episode of Raw that year, Triple H was awarded the new World Heavyweight title by then General Manager of the Red Brand, Eric Bischoff, with this serving as the top prize on...
Yeah, and that's what was made really worse about the Reign of Terror. He didn't wrestle for it, he was just awarded it.
that show going forward. And so, like that then, now with 2 world titles out there, things were truly separate between each show, and as it happened, this would mostly remain the case for the next couple of years, as with Eazy-E running the day-to-day of the red brand and Stephanie McMahon doing the same over on the blue brand, each side would largely remain on their own islands. Hell, we wouldn't even get another draft until 2004, at which point some moves were made in order to freshen things up. Moves such as Edge going to Raw and Rob Van Dam going to SmackDown. The only time the 2 sides would come together outside of that, in fact, would be on one of the big 4 pay-per-views, the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. And even then, actual interbrand matches remained incredibly rare here, with the first big one not occurring until WrestleMania 21 in April of 2005, when Raw's Shawn Michaels battled it out with SmackDown's Kurt Angle. Was this all serving its original purpose of making things more exciting again, as it had been during the Monday Night Wars? Well, yes and no. And we say that because while SmackDown was largely excellent here while it was being creatively led by Paul Heyman, Raw often suffered under the weight of the Reign of Terror. That's right, this was the period where, as the SmackDown 6 were usually killing it over on Thursday nights, putting out some truly great TV on a regular basis, Monday nights were being suffocated by Triple H's 3-year-long attempt to turn himself into a modern-day Harley Race at the expense of everyone else on the roster. And that...
don't remind me. Don't remind us, please.
That wasn't the only reason why the brand split wasn't a true success when it came to creating legitimate competition again, as, even if there were different creative teams for each show, the guy who was ultimately in charge of both remained Vince McMahon. So for that reason, everything was being written to serve him. As you would expect then, whether it was Raw or SmackDown, it all ultimately ended up being the boss's vision by the time all was said and done. So for fans, there was never really a need to choose one show over the other in the same way that people had chosen a side between WWF and WCW. Still, even if this was the case, each brand had enough of its own identity during those early days that the idea was still seen as worthwhile overall. And on top of that, it did allow opportunities for a lot of up-and-coming talent to break through that glass ceiling in a way they probably wouldn't have otherwise. We're talking about names like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, and JBL, just to name a few here. Hell, come the mid-2000s, after names like Steve Austin, The Rock, and Brock Lesnar had all left the company, it allowed for 2 new aces to, at first anyway, appear on equal footing, with Dave Bautista being the undisputed top dog of Raw, and John Cena being the clear superstar of SmackDown. Unfortunately, though, it would also be around this time that cracks started to form in the concept. What were these cracks? Well, with drafts now becoming an annual occurrence, some performers were moving back and forth on a pretty regular basis. And even when drafts weren't taking place, there were an increasing number of cases where wrestlers were appearing on opposing brands anyway, with this starting to water down the idea that these were 2 separate rosters who were at war with one another for ratings supremacy. No, once SmackDown ace John Cena went to Raw in the spring of 2005, and Raw ace Batista jumped over to Thursday nights in response, the idea that anyone was loyal to any particular show began going out the window. How would WWE respond to the feeling that the edge was being taken away from the brand split as a consequence of this? Well, by adding a third Renegade one. Yes, it was after Vince McMahon found a lot of success reviving Extreme Championship Wrestling for the One Night Stand pay-per-view on June 12, 2005, that a year later, he'd bring it back to life again as a full weekly TV show, with this serving as the third brand of WWE going forward. That said, even on those
the third brand before was NXT
early days, WWECW would never be treated as something which was on the same level as a Raw or a SmackDown.
Unfortunately.
No, much like the original ECW had been a few rungs below WWF and WCW.
Can you believe that's piece of shit Don Callis with long ass hair? Back when he's known as Titus. Wow. Or the Jack or WWE.
In terms of power back in the 90s, here the third show would very much feel lesser, much in the way NXT feels today in comparison to what takes place on Monday and Friday nights. As you would expect then, this did little to turn around
and it was low-key almost like an NXT as well too, because I brought a lot of newer star too, just like CM Punk, Elijah Burke, who else? Oh, yeah, Sheamus. I think Sheamus came from the ECW first too. Bobby Lashley. Well, he started on SmackDown, but he came in. But SmackDown at first was almost like the NXT as well too, bring out new faces. But then they became new faces for a lot of people too.
growing sentiment that the brand split was starting to grow
Yeah.
a little long in the tooth. Sure, B-show level pay-per-views like Backlash and No Mercy would remain exclusive to one particular roster for a while, but come the spring of 2007, even that would be over, and from there on in, all big shows would see all three rosters be involved. And this coincided with falling ratings on Raw, SmackDown, and ECW, as once again fan interest started to fall to scary levels. How would WWE respond to these falling ratings? Well, by further diluting the idea of a brand split by trying to hotshot big moments when opposing roster members began appearing on the other show with
Yep.
even more frequency, often with there being no kayfabe explanation given as to why this was happening. So bad would things get, in fact, as the 2000s were drawing to a close, it felt like Vince McMahon himself was starting to lose interest in the idea of there being multiple brands
Facts.
within his company. And this could be seen very clearly in the way Raw became the only show which mattered around then. Yes, SmackDown still would technically have its own roster here, but you could have easily forgotten that was the case after a while, as blue brand wrestler appearances on Monday nights was so commonplace,
Yup.
they may as well have had a lifetime pass to Raw.
Facts.
Hell, even the way the world titles were booked left no doubt as to what the real focus was,
Yeah.
as Raw's WWE title was almost always featured in main events, being battled over by the likes of John Cena.
That is facts, though. This is around the time the World Heavyweight Championship was like opening pay-per-views. That was crazy, though.
Triple H, and more, all while SmackDown's World Heavyweight title became a glorified
Jack Swagger.
mid-card prize to be held by the likes of Alberto Del Rio, Jack Swagger, and the Great Khali,
Yeah.
often in curtain-jerking bouts.
Yup.
And that would all create a bit of a death spiral for the show, which, during the SmackDown 6 days, had so famously been the jewel in WWE's crown, to the point that as the new decade dawned, it had pretty much been reduced to being a recap show for Raw. That's right, if you wanted to see anything of importance
Yeah. I did kind of remember when they low-key started making SmackDown a recap of Raw. That was crazy.
take place, you would have to tune in on Monday nights. And if you wanted to see nothing but filler material and video packages from the bigger show, well, there was a reason. The general sentiment here was that if it happened on SmackDown, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
What was happening with WWE CW around that point?
NXT.
Well, that would be in even worse shape. And this would all lead to a situation where the plug would be pulled on WWE CW outright in February of 2010, with that returning things back to there just being two rosters once more. Well, sort of.
Sort of.
And we say that because it wouldn't be long after this that it was announced by WWE that SmackDown wrestlers would be appearing on Raw full-time
Super
going
Show.
forward. Needless to say, then,
I think this became the WWE the Raw the Monday Night Raw Super Show. Yup.
this effectively ended the first
The Super Show logo being the SmackDown logo, pretty much.
brand
Fine.
split. Sure, it would
Yep.
technically live on for a little while longer yet, but no one gave it any thought as the 2010s got into full swing. And this became even
Yep.
more true when, only a couple of years after that, Raw roster members also became full-time for SmackDown, though this was merely a symbolic gesture, as by now, no one of any importance would be seen dead appearing on the blue brand.
Yeah.
That's right, well, it had started out strong and had seen some pretty good points during the years which followed.
Booker.
In the end, the WWE brand split had gone out with less of a bang and more of a whimper. All that was left then was for something to be done about the two world titles the promotion had on their books. After all, there was no
Yep.
need for such a thing anymore if everyone was back under the
another
same
merge.
roof. So it was that at the TLC Tables, Ladders,
another
and Chairs
unification
pay-per-view on December 15th, 2013, then WWE Champion Randy Orton would challenge then World Heavyweight Champion John Cena in a winner-takes-all ladder match to unify both prizes. Who won this one? Well, that would be the Viper, with this making him the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion. And as the months and years went on from there, things settled back into the way they'd been prior to 2002. But this wouldn't be the end of the brand split forever. No, as time progressed, fan nostalgia for the concept would see people constantly ask for it to return.
Yep.
And WWE would have a desire to do that themselves after a while, as it happened, because by 2016, SmackDown had become so inconsequential it could have easily been canceled, and few would have noticed the difference. So, in an attempt to make the blue brand feel valuable once more then, it would be in the summer of that year that the company brought back the brand split for a second go-around, with this coinciding with SmackDown going live on the USA Network on Friday nights. What was the kayfabe reason for the concept returning here? Well, after Shane McMahon had returned to WWE that year after a lengthy absence, he'd started claiming he could do a better job of running the show than his sister and his brother-in-law had been doing prior to this. And willing to give his son a chance to prove
Somewhat.
himself, Vince McMahon had at that point split things up again, with him deciding going forward that Shane would serve as the commissioner of the blue brand, all while Stephanie would be filling the same role over on the red brand. All that was left then was for another initial draft to be carried out where the rosters would be formally split again. And that happened on the July 19th episode of SmackDown. How did this draft go? Well, like with the first one a decade and a half ago, SmackDown in many ways came out the winner.
Yep.
And the reason we say this is because with general manager Daniel Bryan by his side, Shane McMahon would be able to assemble an initial roster made up of names like John Cena, Randy Orton, Becky Lynch, Bray Wyatt, and most importantly of all, then WWE Champion Dean Ambrose. Yes, once again, the top prize in WWE was exclusive to the blue brand. So while the Raw management team of Stephanie McMahon and her general manager Mick Foley
Universal
would be able to snag an impressive roster of their own, one made up of names such as Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks, and Chris Jericho, they didn't have a world champion on the men's side of the equation. And that was what led to the creation of the Universal title soon thereafter, a title which would initially be worn by then main roster newcomer Finn Balor. So now with there being two men's world titles again, and each locker room decided upon, it was left to both sides to go and try and prove they were better than the other. Who would come out on top during those early days? Well, again, like it happened in 2002, it would be SmackDown who pulled out ahead of the gate by being a show which had a far better level of quality. Unfortunately, though, it wouldn't take long before a lot of the same old issues began to arise with the concept, as well there was an attempt made to keep both rosters separate initially, with things like brand-specific PLEs even being brought back again. By the time a year had passed, the second brand split was already beginning to grow irrelevant.
Yep.
Why was that? Well, again, like with before, wrestlers frequently being drafted back and forth between shows became so commonplace, it became harder and harder to get the feeling that anyone was loyal to any particular
Can you imagine that was KO at one point? Had she wore a suit.
roster.
They
And
tried to
as
make
if that
it
wasn't
corporate.
bad enough, even outside of drafts, it was a regular occurrence to see performers just randomly show up on whatever night of the week they wanted to after a certain point. Hell, kayfabe attempts to justify this, like the wild card rule, were outright mocked on screen by the likes of Kevin Owens. So if the people on TV weren't taking the whole thing seriously, how could any of the fans watching be expected to?
True.
That said, even if the second brand split was struggling in record time here, it wasn't like there weren't positives of the whole thing. After all, it would lead to SmackDown being able to act as the land of opportunity for a while there, a place which could elevate new top stars such as Becky Lynch and Alexa Bliss. And while Raw didn't do as good of a job at building the next generation as its counterpart did, it did give us the initial rise of performers such as Finn Balor. Then, of course, there's the SmackDown effect. If the second brand split doesn't happen, there's no way the blue brand makes it to network TV in the form of Fox here. But even the positives of the brand split reveal would not be enough to see it go undamaged during the lockdown which happened in March of 2020. No, like with all wrestling shows, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT would all suffer here, as now, for the foreseeable future, no fans were going to be allowed to attend the shows. What did that mean for the idea of brand-specific rosters specifically? Well, it meant that, while the concept would still technically be active, the rules would get looser than ever. As with WWE having to try and keep ratings up any way they could, big-name Raw wrestlers would appear on SmackDown and vice versa, with seemingly no rhyme or reason. And this would continue to be a problem once lockdown ended in mid-2021 and fans were allowed back in attendance at shows again. Why was this? Well, because now that the genie had been let out of the bottle and the USA Network and Fox were happy with having all the big stars being on both of their shows, it was very hard to go backwards again.
Right, true.
So it was then that after Roman Reigns beat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 38 to win both the Raw and SmackDown World titles, in the process becoming the undisputed WWE Universal Champion, the dividing lines between the shows got even blurrier, as the Bloodline in particular often made multiple appearances a week on each of the main roster shows.
Oh, yeah.
That said, even if he was now the world champion on Raw too, the fact that Roman was still technically a
Back when I didn't like him, it was Hills.
SmackDown roster member here left the Red Brand's bosses unhappy, as it meant the vast majority of the Tribal Chief's increasingly rare appearances were happening on the other show. So feeling like they needed a full-time champ who could truly represent their brand, they decided to bring back the old World Heavyweight title in April of 2023, with this version of the belt, while looking very similar and having the same name, technically representing the start of an all-new lineage separate from the original. As to who would be the first person to hold that strap, well, that would be Seth Rollins, with him treating it more like a workhorse title, one which was distinct from the by then rarely defended Hollywood prize being held by his former Shield brother. Would this help to revive the brand split again? Maybe a little. But to be honest, by now it was going to take a lot more to make it feel as vital as it had back in 2002, or even as important as it had briefly seemed back in 2016. And that was clear when even more performers seemed to move back and forth between Raw and SmackDown at will, as Triple H fully took over the book once Vince McMahon was ousted from the promotion in full. Yes, while the game had done a lot to turn WWE's fortunes around creatively during the early to mid-2020s, one thing he'd never been able to do was make the divide between Raw and SmackDown feel any more real. That said, unlike the darkest days of the original incarnation of the concept back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, at least it's no longer the case that SmackDown is a completely irrelevant show anymore. Hell, it remains the main home of acts like Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns, probably the two biggest stars in the entire company. And while NXT has long since returned to being a developmental brand several rungs below the red and blue brands, it's now not alone in being at that level of the WWE hierarchy. No, while they're not given much attention in the grand scheme of things, shows like Evolve and TNA have now become feeder systems for NXT in many ways, with this allowing them to, in some sense, serve as fourth and fifth brands within WWE's brand extension. The only question left,
6, we've got Triple A, but that's a whole different story.
Is, will this be enough to see it continue on going forward? After all, we all know that at a certain point during the early 2010s, the lack of clear delineations between the brands led to the original split being dropped. So with those lines being pretty blurry again today, there's every chance we could see the rosters being fully merged into one again at some point in the not too distant future. Or who knows, maybe the opposite happens and WWE decides to go all in on the concept again, once more fully separating the locker rooms and making the brand split feel like an actual split. Whatever happens though, even if this is the start of a new era for it, or if we're in the latter days of its second incarnation as we speak, one thing is for sure, and that is that the brand split will always be remembered as something which completely changed the makeup of WWE forever, right at a time they needed to shake up the most. So for this reason alone, it'll always have an important place in the company's history.
Cool. So there you have it, though. The history of the brand split, though. Definitely a good little history lesson as well, too, though. I mean, currently right now it's so. I feel like this past draft they did like a while back at the WrestleMania 40, they should include champions as well too. I think that they kind of heard a lot of title runs for folks, you know, they still work with pretty good though as well too. But what's your thought on the brand split right now? Do you think they need to end this too? The only reason I don't want to do it, I don't need a unification. And then, as folks say, I hear damn title up or another type of titles, all that as well too. We don't need that. Well, other than that, though, if you love my reaction to this, like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's your boy T-Bird signing off. One love.